And so, all right. Okay. Everybody get their drinks. Okay. So, let me just start by saying thanks for coming. It means a lot to have people willing to think through these things together. And just, I know many of you are just meeting for the first time, so you don't know how many kind of interesting, really bright people are in the room, but you guys have a lot to contribute. And so I hope that this turns into more of a conversation than just a monologue as we continue. But let me just begin by kind of saying a word about what we're doing and what my approach is for this. We're going to, over the course of several sessions, however many you guys are willing to do, I guess, but we will look at Genesis 1 through 11 from kind of a philosophic angle, okay? And so I'm calling this the stuff that we're made of. And the reason I want us to think about this, part of what's really interesting about it to me, is that the book of Genesis is the story. It's an account of how one family emerges, establishes, flourishes in such a way that it then can become this distinctive people, a nation among the nations, okay, distinctive from the rest. And that's really kind of the whole story of the Old Testament, of the Hebrew Bible, is of this one family becoming a nation, and how it fares in that in relation to this one God that calls it into being. But the story of Israel doesn't begin with Israel. The story of Israel, of this particular family become nation, begins with this kind of prologue in Genesis 1 through 11. That's a set of stories that depicts what is it that all humanity has in common. What are the most fundamental experiences, dilemmas, failures that we negotiate. And as such, Genesis 1 through 11, prior to kind of the call of Abraham and the beginning of this family, it's the closest we have in the Bible to a treatise on human nature. Okay? But it's important that the way that it's written, what we have there is a story, a set of stories. It's not just kind of abstract. It's not, here's the bits that go into making up a human being. But it's dynamic. And that's important because we live in a world of particulars. We have to deal with concrete dilemmas in life. And so this gives us a way of thinking through those in a way that aims not just at some kind of universal knowledge, but at something more like wisdom. Okay? So what I want us to do is spend some time kind of slowly going through these first chapters, these stories. And I plan to engage with this text philosophically. And here's what I mean by that. I want to kind of look at these stories closely, read them carefully, with an aim to gaining clarity on what is being depicted. Okay, what do these give us kind of windows into in human life? Okay, so think of these stories as kind of opening out a window, a vista on something And what we want to do is we want to kind of find a way to look through that window well to see what's being depicted in human life. Now, to do that in our day and age requires suspending a certain amount of disbelief. Okay? And when I say suspending, here's what I mean. I'm not going to ask you to believe this yet, okay? Or disbelieve it. What I'm going to aim at is kind of getting clear as to what it's doing, what it's showing, okay? And I think if we can get clear on that, then we'll be able to be like, oh yeah, that rings true, or oh, that's nothing that I can recognize, okay? And so it's kind of this lower threshold that I'm trying to clear, okay? It's just can we engage with these stories, these accounts in such a way that we see what they're trying to show us, and then kind of compare that. Does that match up with something I experience in life? Okay? So to do that, though, there's this kind of suspension. And when I say suspension, I don't mean try to believe what you don't believe, or vice versa. It just means it's kind of like, you've got your engine in your car. You can put it in neutral, right? And you can kind of coast. You can just put it in neutral. And that's what I'm going to ask us to do about, if you're worried about Big Bang or evolution, or even about particular dogmas, we can just kind of put those in neutral. They don't go away. They're still there. Okay, you don't lose them, right? But we can put them in neutral, and then we can kind of look at this particular account and just kind of gaze through the window and try to see what it looks like. Okay, so we'll aim for clarity there. Now, part of this method then also is as we kind of engage these stories, suspending any disbeliefs, we also then when we see what they're talking about in terms of human life, we'll want to compare that with our own experiences. Okay, so we'll come back to kind of our firsthand experience of being a human being in this world, and that's a point of comparison. Okay, so that's what I plan to do. What that means is we'll kind of proceed, at least in what I'm saying, more existentially than dogmatically. Okay. Now, I hope that what I say won't be the only thing said here. And so I'm looking forward to plenty of dialogue. And so raise questions, push back, suggest something else. That's all fair game, okay? But let's then begin with Genesis chapter 1, all right? And I've given you just the Septuagint, and so if anyone wants that, then we can work through it with that. I don't have the Hebrew printed. We have Nathan here instead, and so. But when we first pick up Genesis 1, we meet a kind of a flip. There's a foreground background shift that's already taking place compared to what you find in most ancient texts that have to do with beginnings, right? So in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The earth was formless and void, or, you have the tohu wabohu, right? Chaos and waste, you could say. Darkness is over the abyss, and the Spirit of God moves over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God made a separation in the midst of lights, one light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the night He called the darkness He called night. And so there was evening and there was morning, day one, or so when we pick up this text and begin to read it, part of what confronts us is this immediacy of God. So in the beginning, God, okay, God creates. And I want us to think about that a bit, because sometimes what's really important about the Bible isn't so much what it says as what it doesn't say. It's not so much what's in it as what's absent from it. And this is one of those cases, because we have from the ancient Near East creation stories, creation accounts. And the oldest ancient Near Eastern creation stories are war stories. They're about a battle between a god or gods and a chaos monster, and then this world that is produced out of the kind of the aftermath of this battle, of this war. And so the idea of kind of war as something that is generative, that creates, that lays the foundation for a world, right, is something that goes really deep in a lot of ancient Near Eastern thought, and this is stepping out of that. So there's this kind of shift that I want you to try to feel. Like, imagine what it would be that as you walk around, you get up and you make breakfast in the morning, you work on, building an addition onto your house or whatever, right? That every place you walk, everything you do, it's founded upon this battle, upon this war, okay? Violent coercion frames everything, sets the world in order. Now, part of what that does, it also gives a sense of how big changes take place in the world, and how you make something worthwhile in the world. And it gets secularized down the road into our own world with this kind of idea of revolution as what can bring about this, kind of miraculous change in a society or something like that, right? And so that's there in a lot of ancient Near Eastern creation stories, and it's not here. It's not here, okay? Another thing that's in a lot of ancient creation stories, and now kind of like thinking of Hesiod and so forth, is sexual activity as world constituting, world producing, right? So you have, the sea, the land and the sky, right? And sexual activity that then brings about the beginnings of a world in a lot of ancient myths there. And so war and sex are usually the first thing that you get when you talk about how a world comes into being in the ancient world, okay? And here there's something else, okay? Here there's something else. And so here it just begins with God speaks, okay? God creates heaven, earth. There's chaos, but the chaos comes after he makes, and then he orders it. So that's really, really big. That's fundamental. Okay. Part of what this is gesturing towards, what this is depicting in the story, is something that's really distinctive to Israelite monotheism. In other words, this kind of understanding of there being just one God, that's different in Israelite thought than from other forms of monotheism. You got other monotheisms of sorts in the ancient world. I always forget the guy's name. Anak. Huh? The Egyptian guy, Anak, say it again? Yeah, okay. Anyhow, so you have this guy for what? It's like 18 years or something. He reigns, and he identifies, he said there's one God, but he identifies it with the Son, right? And just point out, that is nowhere in the neighborhood of Israelite monotheism. And here's why. Okay, part of what happens in Israelite monotheism is this. Kind of the philosophic core of it is to say there is no such thing as a meta-divine, in other words, a meta-divine realm, a realm behind God or the gods. Okay? In every other form of thought, of like what you get is in pagan thought, is that there's this kind of background realm, usually associated with nature, okay, that just is, it's there, right? And then the divine or God, right, or gods emerge out of that. And so when you read for instance, Hesiod, right? Hesiod, it's you get the theogony, how the gods are born, right? But it comes out of this background realm that's already there, right? And so, so the divine God doesn't go all the way down in most thought systems. What's unique, what's really, really special in Israelite thought is that they identify this notion of God having this independent existence, and he's there before and separate from any kind of background realm. Okay? And so he's never identified with nature in that way. So he couldn't be the sun because the sun's just one thing out there, right? Now, this sense that kind of the reality of God is something that's fundamental, that goes all the way down, and that differs from paganisms. There's some kind of telltale signs, by the way, when you're working with a thought system where there's a background realm that goes deeper than the divine, and that is you'll find things like gods that are magicians. Okay? Magic tends to be its power that comes from this background realm, right? And so you have this idea that certain gods, they can create spells, or they pull things out from this background realm that gives special powers even for the divine, right? So there's something deeper. There's something that goes back behind God or the gods in that thought system if you have a magician god, right? And that's something that's, by the way, just an aside, even Aristotle saw that as something perplexing among his, the aporia, right? Aporias. You have, he when he's talking about Hesiod, and I think this is book 2 of the Metaphysics, he says, so they're eternal by eating ambrosia. He said, but if they're eternal, why do they need to eat? Right? And if, it's like, he's like, either they're eternal, then they don't need this, or if they need this stuff, then they can't be eternal. It's kind of this lasting perplexity to him. But this is that kind of background realm at work, right? That there's certain substances. You also see this in ancient Near Eastern thought, where kind of deep morality comes from this background realm, kind of deeper than the gods, right? So anyhow, what happens with Israelite monotheism is, no, there's just this particular God, and his existence is independent. He doesn't need something else to charge his battery, to give him the powers to do what he's going to do. He has that capacity all on his own, and then he creates. Okay? Now, if you think about creation in this way, like you have depicted in this text, there's this kind of flip that is required in our mind. And a good way to get at this in kind of positive terms is to use this later rabbinic idea. Among the names of God that the rabbis contemplate is this one that comes from, the origin of it was reflection on Jacob's ladder in Genesis 28. But anyhow, they would talk about God as hamakom, the place. Okay? And the point that they were making is, what they say is, the world is not the place of God. God is the place of the world, the place of creation. In other words, they say if you want to understand the God that we're working with, you have to do this kind of this flip, this shift. Think about it this way. If there's no background realm, there's nothing that's deeper or behind, before God, then before creation, what exists? What is there?
Only God.
Just God. Yeah, there's God. That's it. There's nothing but God, right? And so creation involves God, who is all there is, making a space, so to speak. This is using a spatial metaphor, and you have to understand it's metaphor, right? But nonetheless, he as it were, makes room for that which is not God to exist. Okay? And what do we call not God? Everything else, creatures, right?
So
Yeah.
there is something outside the universe, you mean?
Yes, on this account, God, in terms of existence, God exists prior to any stuff. So we can kind of work with this in terms of contemporary cosmology, but I'm trying to get the world picture to start with here. So, but yes, you're onto a good question. I can see it brewing. So it's something like this. So if God makes space for that which is not Him to exist, so he facilitates the existence of these things called creatures, and so the whole cosmos then is this, as it were, opened up by God making space for it, allowing it to exist as something other than Himself, right? Then what this invites us to think is something like this. Instead of there's this vast world and then there's some God trying to do something with it, it would be something like this. There's this vast God who makes space for a world that will never be out of His reach, right? It can never be out of His reach because He's as it were the place within which that world occurs. Okay, so that's the kind of flip with regard to God and world that this text kind of works with. Okay, anyhow, we can try it on. We're going to peer through this window for a little bit. Okay, now as this God begins to speak, then there's the emergence of this kind of ordered world. And let's just say a word here about, we get two creation accounts here in Genesis, in the opening chapters of Genesis. There's Genesis 1 through 2:4 or 3, I'm sorry. And then 2:4 is kind of the seam, it's the zipper between the two stories. And then from 2:5 on through the end of chapter 2, there's a separate, a very different account, and they interact with each other. Okay, and so today we'll just work with the one. The Genesis 1 account is kind of a top-down vision of the world, and it kind of focuses on how the big, kind of the macro structure gets put together, is put together. And then out of this, you get a kind of an account of human beings that focuses on personhood in a way that I think is trying to depict or name something like the essence of personhood. Okay? And so we'll try to get to that today. Next time, we'll do this chapter 2, which kind of flips it. It's this bottom-up account in which human beings are kind of depicted kind of in a very kind of ordinary world of a garden with an inside and outside, and it's local, and everything gets shone through everyday life in the body. So it's like it flips it over, okay? And so it's not uncommon in Scripture for important ideas or events to get narrated more than once and from very different angles. Okay, and I think the idea is just there's different things to see, and so you need multiple accounts in order to kind of think whatever it's trying to get you to think. Okay, so let's look at Genesis 1. there are 6 days. Well, there's 7 days, but the first 6 days are the ones in which the creation itself emerges, is called forth, is spoken into being. And the way that it works is that there's a kind of a parallelism. In other words, you get on days 1 through 3 certain environments that are established. So God says, "Let there be light," and He separates light from darkness. Right? Day 1, sees the light's good. Day 1. Day 2, He separates. Puts this hard dome, is the picture, between waters up above and waters down below, and separates like sky from seas. Day 2. Day 3, He makes dry land emerge, kind of pop up from among all this water and vegetation. So those are kind of 3 realms, 3 environments. And it's common to notice, interpreters, biblical scholars have noticed that there's this kind of parallelism, that in days 4, 5, and 6, these realms are inhabited, are given, smaller beings to inhabit them that are appropriate to those realms. So the realms of light and darkness are given sun and moon and stars, right? And the sea and the sky are given birds and sea creatures, right? And the land, the dry land, is then given land animals and such. Okay, and then human beings on it. So this kind of parallelism between spaces and inhabitants is something that's very commonly commented on. But there's something else that is not as often commented on that I think is really important here. And that is that built into this is a kind of a hierarchy of types of motion. Okay, types of motion. And so think about it this way. All of these kind of realms or spheres or environments, they're relatively unmoving. Not absolutely, but relatively stable, compared to the things that then are created to inhabit them. Okay, so God makes things that goes into these environments, and each of those things that go in do a lot more moving. Okay, but there's like a qualitative difference in the kinds of motion in these creatures within these realms. Okay, so think about it with me for just a minute. So you have sun, moon, stars, and we're told that they're there to keep time for days and years and seasons, right? So there's a cyclical nature to their movement, right? And of course, in the ancient world, usually they're thought to be quite cyclical, okay, to the point of being like circles, right? But they move in a course, right? They move in a course. Then you have birds and sea creatures and fish and all of this. And how do they move? Do they go in courses? No, they veer, right? There's this kind of a unpredictable nature, to how they move, right? They have this capacity to change their course, right? And then you have this final being, and this is where I want us to look at the language used here. In verse 26 and following, so it's on the back side of that first page. That God creates the human being according to His own. He says, "Let us create human being according to our image and likeness, and let them rule, have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and of the cattle and of on all the land and every reptile or every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, right? And God made man according to His image. He made them male and female. He made them, and God blessed them and said, increase, multiply, fill the earth, rule over it, reign over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and so forth, right? So there's this creature who kind of emerges as the pinnacle in this hierarchy of motion, and this creature has dominion. Okay, dominion, ra, reigns. Okay, rada, and I think within this kind of this picture of motion, you can see that what's being implied here is something like what maybe we would call agency, right? That if you have the sun, moon, stars, and they move in a course, and you have these, birds, fish, land animals, and they veer, they can change course. You then have these beings that can, as it were, choose their way, right? That have a say over themselves and over what's going to happen in this world to some degree. And that then, another thing that I think we see in this passage is that gives them a certain moral ambiguity, a certain ambiguity. I should just maybe not use the word moral yet. A certain ambiguity, okay? In this way, as we go through all of this, one of the refrains, one of the things that gets repeated is that God, after He makes something, He then sees it, kind of acknowledges it as good, right? So He makes the light, and He sees the light, and sees the light's good. And then the dry land and the seas, and He says, that's good. And then vegetation that bears seed, that's good, right? Sun, moon, stars, good. Birds, fish, good. Land animals, good. And then He makes this being that's His own image and has dominion, and it doesn't say that He sees that He's good. Okay? It doesn't say He's bad or anything. It's like it's an open question at some level. Okay? So what does that mean? Well, I don't know, maybe in part we have to think about what does this mean to see these things as good? Okay? Because I don't, maybe moral isn't the right way to think about the meaning of goodness in these cases. Like what does it mean for a cucumber to be morally good? Like I don't know what that would be, or the island of Scopolos, or your daughter's pet fish Nemo, right? So they're all good, but probably not moral in that sense, right? So there's something here that it's, so maybe, just a thought, maybe goodness here has to do something like being all that it's supposed to be, right? Like all put together, like this is a fine example of what this kind of thing is supposed to be, something like that. And then human beings, maybe specifically because they're fashioned with an aim of choosing their way and exercising some say over this world, some dominion in partnership with God, they can't be done yet, right? So he can't see that they're good because they're not done yet. Something like that. It's a thought, okay? So we can kind of just let that sit and we'll play with it a little bit, okay? Come on in. And there's some handouts right here if you want one. So, and then, okay, so let me ask you to explore this idea of dominion a little bit, of agency, and then I'll stop talking and we'll start. We'll see what you guys want to pick up on. And I'm just pulling on a few threads here. There's a lot more in this chapter, and so we can chase some of the other things in here as anybody sees fit. Okay, but this idea of dominion, of reign, as being something by which human beings become an image, like a statue, is kind of the picture here, the B'Tselem Elohim, right? In the image of God. So the thought world is probably something like this. There's probably some kind of a priestly worldview at work here, where you have this picture that God, he reigns over some heavenly sphere, some heavenly court, and he has say. He said, he decides what's going to happen there. And then in this lower realm, he makes this kind of being that is going to be his image. And the intention is for us to exercise an analogous role here in this realm as he does up above, something like that. And what's implied in that is that it would be synergistic, if I can use that word. In other words, that if we exercise dominion or agency as a way of imaging God, implicitly, whatever it is that we're doing kind of with God, for God, something like that, right? So there's a fittedness between human action and divine action, God's action, okay? Nikos, you can grab one of these handouts if you want. Okay. So there's this kind of ancient worldview that's embedded here, but what I want to do is suggest that this idea of dominion, that we have this kind of impulse to want to make something happen in the world, and that's fundamental to what it means to be a person, right? I want to suggest that it's not just an ancient metaphor or an artifact of this ancient worldview. It's not something that that you're supposed to believe just because it happens to be in this book, right? That actually, that there's a sense in which it's an experience we've all had, okay? And I'm going to see if I can make that intuitive to you now, okay? So I think what's being referred to here is this dominion, kind of existentially, experientially, is something like this, that to be a person is to have an impulse to want to shape the world in some way. We want the world to be different because we were here in a really, really basic way. Think about it this way. How many of you who would like to die someday without ever having made any difference in the world? Like there's no ripple to show that you were here. Okay. I've literally asked that on like 4 continents with dozens of different groups, and I have yet to have a taker on that. Okay. I have a feeling that may be something like really universal in human experience, is that we have this kind of desire that we want to make a difference, right? And it starts super early in life. Okay? If you think about small children, infants, right? That we kind of emerge and we have this kind of impulse to want to make things happen, but all we have to work with to start with is just our body, and we don't really control that yet, right? It's more like a project, a promise, than a possession. And so those little bodies, like, those children, you have to do everything for them. You feed them, you dress them, and so forth. But you see they have an impulse where they want to do something themselves. And so you try feeding them, right? And pretty soon something happens, right? As you're reaching for them with the spoon, what do? Right? And then they want to feed themselves, right? But they're not in control of their, it's like going in the wrong holes and stuff, but they're driven. They want to do this thing, right? And then like slowly they gain mastery and they can eat and they can, walk. If you just think of how deep this impulse to be an agent, to make the world, to kind of have some mastery, how deep that goes. Just think about the wonder that we all ended up being bipeds. In other words, we walk on 2 feet, we don't crawl. That's a massive achievement. And think of how much pain everybody goes through to do that. Like how many times do you fall? How many, bruises? How many scrapes? And yet everybody keeps doing it, right? It's like there's something deep in us that wants to master, right? And so slowly we kind of master our bodies. Someday you're trying to tie your kid's shoe, and they're like, no, I do it. And then you get some really creative looking knots, and then they get a little older and they start making things. And at our age, you'll find, usually there's a drawer somewhere with some rather unique looking little objects because, they'll make something, they want it to be good. They'll be very upset if it's not, maybe break it, but if it's good, the next thing they want to do is give it to you, right? And so mastery, this kind of dominion, right? It's a basic human experience, and I think of it as kind of going kind of from the body out in kind of concentric circles. And then, so gradually, as they gain control of their body, they then kind of have control of mom and dad's house. And, I remember at one point, everything that Carly and I wanted to have for us, it had to go about here up in the room. Because if it was underneath, the kids got it, right? And so there's this kind of, dominion that grows as the person gains some mastery in life, right? And eventually that includes then things that happens in, sports and school and subject matter and moves on out into the world. But this impulse, it's really, really basic. It's fundamental. And it's a way in which we kind of image or mirror, we represent and work with God in this world, according to this picture, okay? Let me add one last piece to it, two. One last thing about the dominion. Late in life, people spend a lot of time thinking about how to pass on what they've built, the changes that they've made in the world, right? Legacy it's a part of this kind of dominion, right? This impulse for agency for the good, something like that is how I think of this. And okay, so then the last thing I want to point out is, so you get this creature given dominion. There's some ambiguity about how good that creature will be, right? And then day 7, rest. Now, I want you to think about that in terms of, we've had this kind of hierarchy of motion, and then it kind of completes in a day that's going to be set apart for rest. What might that be about? How would that relate to dominion or agency?
Well, first of all, dominion is taking the responsibility, taking care of the rest.
That's right. Yeah, it's taking care. That's right. Responsibility.
Possession or dominion is. Okay, so
yeah.
Now it is your responsibility to take care of the world.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So dominion involves responsibility. And so it's maybe something like stewardship, right? We have to take care of the world. And so then the fact that we're told, but you do all that on 6 days, and on this day, just stop, right? There's something I think maybe it authenticates in a way the freedom of the agency, right? The fact that we can have a day where we don't make anything else out of. That's the when it says that he sets apart and sanctifies. The idea of sanctity in Hebrew scripture primarily has to do with it's what you don't make anything else out of. You don't instrumentalize it for the sake of something else, right? And so, when you make the altar, you don't apply a tool to the stone because it'll defile it, right? And this is a day that you don't use for a different purpose, right? And just thinking of this in terms of the motion, it's kind of like you have all these forms of motion, from just in cycles to veering to being able to change your ways, so to speak. And a day of rest, kind of that, it kind of crowns that as being truly free. Like, if you can both take responsibility for the world and stop, right? Then there's a freedom there that's different from just compulsive motion, compulsive action, right? Does that make sense? I don't know. Mm-hmm.
Like it's complete. When something is complete, it has more freedom.
Yeah, something like that. The quality of our action, our capacity to act, to be free in acting, is kind of indicated by the fact not only that I can start something, but I can also stop. If I can start and not stop, well, like when you drive, that's a real problem, right? So it's very important you can stop as well, right? And so I think there's something here like freedom. It's both the capacity to begin and to choose, to oversee, and it's the capacity to know how to stop, right? Both are included in that. Anyhow, that's at least a thought I'm playing with. So, okay, all right, yes, yeah, let's.
Does this has to do with trust in the Creator?
Do you want to hand him a? Yeah.
So if you want to speak, we'll have this. It's like a mic you speak into.
Okay.
It's for the video.
Okay, so does this season of doing things has to do in what you said before, trusting the Creator? So I stop doing things, then I pass this responsibility, so to say, to the one who's responsible for everything else, including myself and the job he has ascribed to me of doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think that it does imply an element of trust. And I would just say, if you practice this, you find out rather quickly how much trust is involved, because inevitably there'll be some point where it's like, it's a little nerve-wracking to not work that day, But yeah, I think that how do you put this? This is also part of that kind of deep background picture that if we live in a world that's not the product of war, right, but rather of a God that can kind of speak things into existence and things take shape, then that's kind of authenticated at the level of lived experience in this capacity to be like, the world won't fall apart if I stop on this day, right? And that doesn't mean that there aren't exceptions and all of that, right? But there's that kind of baseline, I've been given say over the world. I make a real difference. That's dominion, that's agency, and the world doesn't completely depend on me. Both of those, right? Yeah.
But guys, there is a fundamental.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thanks,
Well,
Ghost.
there is a fundamental problem
Uh-huh.
or question, whatever
Uh-huh.
here. Genesis says that everything was done,
Mm-hmm.
perfect, finished, stopped.
Uh-huh.
But we know that nothing has stopped.
Mm-hmm.
Evolution goes on and goes on and so on.
Right,
So
right.
if Moses were today here,
Mm-hmm.
would he say the same thing, you think?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. So how does this relate to that? A couple things I'll notice. The first is, I think that I don't think that actually there's a necessary conflict between this text and evolution at the deep sense. And here's why. Part of what's actually pointed out here is that not only does God call things into existence, but then he calls for some things to produce other things. Okay? And so in verse 11, for instance, God doesn't say, let there be vegetation. He says, let the earth produce vegetation. And then it makes a point of saying that the earth produces it. And you have a similar thing that happens then in day 6 with the land animals. Let the earth bring forth living creatures. So there's a kind of a mediated creation that's built into this account. And so all I would say is I don't think that a biological prehistory would invalidate this account as a kind of as a kind of a broad picture of the cosmos that we inhabit. It's not designed to be a it's operating in a different key, right? But I don't think that there's a necessary, like an incompatibility there, though they are different. I mean, they're different, obviously, but I don't think that they have to be incompatible. And I think another thing I'd say about this is that I think, in terms of what it's trying to point out, this kind of what are humans kind of put together to do? I think experientially, I don't know. We'll see. I mean, from what I did in terms of this kind of description of agency, dominion as a fundamental impulse, it rings true to me, and I think that even though it's very ancient, I don't think that that's inaccessible. I think we can see that as something that that kind of describes something fundamental about human beings. In fact, I can turn it around this way. I described what it's like to have this impulse to make something happen. We have the experience of interacting with people who've largely lost that. If you see somebody in the grip of a Great Depression, right, just can't get up to do anything, they just don't want anything now, all of that. It's really disconcerting. It's really disconcerting. And what I want to just ask is why? And I think the reason that's disconcerting to us is because of this kind of intuition of personhood as agency at some level, right? There's something like that. So anyhow, I mean, yeah. So great questions. Yeah.
I have a
Pandali.
few questions.
Great.
Yeah. Either way, concerning this question, I think also we can mention, we're allowed to mention Basil the Great, that he has like this phrase on his Hexaemeron, like that God introduced like the creative powers. Yeah. I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
remember the exact phrasing in the ancient Greek text. I'm not saying this because okay, I'm an Orthodox and from my background I try to no, mostly because he understands. I think ancient Greek is his mother language, and he understands the text maybe sometimes better than we do. So it would be interesting to see how he understands at his time this. Anyway, and yes, I would like to make a few questions. Some of them may be provocative, let's say, but some others.
Provoke away.
Okay, thanks. The first one has to do with the so-called concept of enotheism in Israel, because there are like many,
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
among many Old Testament scholars,
Yeah.
there is like this preeminent idea that there isn't, at least from up to a point, there is monotheism, but there is also
Yeah, it
enotheism.
starts with henotheism and evolves
Henotheism,
into
yes.
monotheism. Right, yeah.
So, how would you answer to this concept concerning this text? So, is the writer an henotheist, or is he a monotheist that tries to answer to, how can I say, to make the Israelites slowly to drive them away from this henotheism to enotheism, or
Yeah. So I think that you have a full-blown monotheism. The best kind of refutation of that I know is in the work. It's a history of religion in Israel, or of the Israelite religion, I think is what it is, by Ezekiel Kaufman. It was a multi-volume in modern Hebrew, which I don't read and haven't read. But there's a substantial portion, mostly kind of the Old Testament portion, that is translated into English. And basically what he's pointed out is a vast number of holes in the chronology of how they arrange texts in order to argue for the henotheism developmental picture. And it seems like it's more ideologically driven than in that case. So I'm no expert on this. So, but he's somebody whose work is worth examining. My sense is it's not been well responded to. But then the other thing there would just be part of answering that has to do with what counts as henotheism versus monotheism. In other words, does it make it henotheism if you think that there's any kind of a divine realm? And I don't think it does, but that's often what's behind the argument for that, right? And so here you have an account where, it's let us, make him in our image and so forth. There's some kind of God isn't lonely, right? There's something already there in the heavenly realm, right? And so this picture of the sons of God, as they're called in some texts and so forth, being there, I don't think that would negate a full monotheism, as long as there's an understanding that the Creator is not one of these. These are also creatures. Even though they're in the heavenlies, so to speak. So basically so it depends on what you count. Yeah.
okay. Yeah, maybe
Somebody else may want to
please,
address that.
please.
Can you define for those of us who don't know what
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Henotheism. Yeah, henotheism. It just means it means like one. It's the difference between only God and kind of one God, but meaning like the best God. So henotheism is the idea that there's lots of gods, but there's this one, and he's our one, and he's the best, right? And so it's kind of like, it's yay team versus, there's just the one God. And so, yeah.
It's partly raised by scripture itself, which like Psalm 81, I think, says.
Yeah, 81,
I've
82,
said
something like that. Yeah,
82, yeah.
yeah. God in the council of the gods.
Yeah, exactly. I've said you are gods.
Mhm.
Right? And so,
Yeah.
who exactly is he addressing? He raises that kind of question.
Yeah, yeah.
I have a quick
Mhm.
thought I'd like to share. When you're talking about the motion, the sort of impulse for dominion that we have,
Mhm.
I was thinking like, oh, it's exhausting being human, you know, because you don't really know what it's for.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Mm.
And I was wondering if you think the Sabbath is related to the satisfaction that could come with like, oh, I know why I'm exercising it. Now I can rest with the results, being satisfied with the results.
Mhm.
If that's
Mhm.
something that like Sabbath could be, and
Mhm.
because we're on the topic of sort of philosophical readings of Genesis, I was
Mhm.
thinking too of like, this is a problem that Greek philosophers really wrestled with, like why, you know,
Mhm.
why motion?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like Aristotle was obsessed with this. Why
Yeah.
motion? So he came up with the theory of the four causes.
Mhm.
And so one of the causes is the final cause, like it's the reason why you're doing it, it's the purpose.
Mhm.
And I was wondering if the Sabbath could be potentially related to that. Like
Mhm.
it's there's something here which is related to goodness, perhaps the goodness that is not yet given to man, but there's something to work towards potentially.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
I think you wanted to.
Yeah. So a first response to it would be, so yeah, God, having completed a basic ordering, he rests, and he kind of sets this time apart to be for rest and invites us into it, you know. And so, yes, I think there's something to that, especially since when it's later picked up, so there's, jumping later, in Exodus, you have this picture of you rest because you were slaves and I brought you out and so forth, right? And so it's, we in this we image God, we imitate God in God's rest, right? But then you go to Deuteronomy, and it's kind of with this vision of you're going to go into the land, and now you're going to have, a place and some power and all of that. And there, the Sabbath, it's something that has more to do with what you give. You take it, yes, but you make sure you give it to all of your workers and so forth. And so it's a way of ensuring that that we don't, that the people don't misuse their power in those situations. And so there's kind of multiple resonances there, but I do think that the what you get with finality, final causation in Aristotle is something very similar to sanctity at this level, right? How do you know something is worthwhile? Well, it's done for its own sake. It's not instrumental to something else, right? It's that towards which other things are the instrument, right? Are used. Sanctity is that which you don't instrumentalize. It's there for its own sake. And so you don't, so with Sabbath, you don't use it to earn or to transform something with building an altar. You don't modify the stones because that defiles. With holy places, you're forbidden to walk through them just as a shortcut, right? It's like this idea of what you don't instrumentalize. It'd be something like this. Like you could imagine, like how would you know what's sacred to a culture? This is getting dated because we don't have television that much anymore. But there are things that you would not put, that a society won't put commercials in the middle of on the television. Right? And if you ask, what would you not interrupt for a commercial? That says something about some intuition of sanctity for that culture, right? You can't instrumentalize it for something else. And if you instrumentalize it for something else, it seems like you've done something wrong, right? So that's getting at the same, there's something akin there between sanctity and finality. Yeah. So anyhow, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great spoon, by the way.
Yeah.
No ice cream to go with it. Well, I wanted to say two things. One about the Sabbath as not having an end here in the text.
Right, right.
Every other day has an end except the Sabbath.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's somehow picked up in the New Testament also in Hebrews. You've entered into this rest, but for quite different purposes.
Yeah.
It seems like there might be a sense also, something to explore, that dominion as a larger category can only really begin when people rest. And this kind of gets to your point about what it means to be human is being able to cease. And you have this idea of probably behind Genesis is this first chapter, if you don't keep the Sabbath, we're going to get knocked by the Babylonians again.
Right.
So here's a good reason to keep the Sabbath. And it's almost like if we don't keep the Sabbath, then the world is very unstable, and there's no order to the chaos, the ultimate chaos. And so it's almost like I wouldn't see such a distinction between dominion and Sabbath, but probably
That is
more
completed
like
by
this
Sabbath.
is like moving in day, where you can exercise dominion. And if you don't do it, because God did it, so you better do it, because we didn't do it before, and that's why we got stuck in Babylon, or maybe something like that. But so probably this idea of world order is important to maybe. I don't know about from an existential perspective. It's like, can we really actually participate in the order in the world if we don't have this sacred rhythm of resting like God did?
Right.
Because through that rest, He's actually bringing order to the world, which is kind of interesting when you look at Moses building overseeing the tabernacle. He repeats almost verbatim the language of God in terms of building creation. Right. God sees it, it's good. Moses sees the tabernacle, it's good. It all happens in 7-day kind of categories.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And without that tabernacle, there's no order in the world. I think I'm going to rest from that comment because...
Well, hey, let me add one piece to it. It's part of what's interesting in this is the way in which it's oriented around a non-natural time unit. In this sense, like by natural, I mean what you can't miss. Like nature has a sense of, from the old gray, like feel, right? It's what sprouts up, what stands in front of you, you can't miss it, right? Well, days and years are natural time units. It's hard to miss, it gets, the turn of the day and the turn of the year. But weeks are kind of arbitrary as far as that goes. Like just like out of our own, I don't know that we would have landed on 7 days as a normal rotation, right? And it's interesting, even like the whole like evening and morning. Like I think maybe part of what that might be, I don't know what you think. Maybe that's like an anti-dualism thing. Like if you had morning and then evening, it'd be easy to think the day is just the light time, right? But if it's evening and then morning, then it obviously includes the darkness as part of it. So I don't know. It's but there's something about wanting us to keep time in a way that isn't just days and years. Yeah. So anyhow.
Yeah. but there's also that climax of there's
Yeah.
nothing better than the Sabbath.
Right.
Because
Yeah, yeah,
that day
that's
never
right.
ends.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
and then that whole idea you mentioned before about creating with speech is really, I think, quite powerful.
Uh-huh.
You know, Moses does it to a certain degree, kind of world
Mm-hmm.
building. So we could add
Mm-hmm.
war, sex, and speech, I guess, is a
Yes.
triad.
Yeah.
And then the one thing about that I wanted to mention about monotheism is that this is such a fighting ground for that term. I mean, because people like Nathan MacDonald
Uh-huh.
will argue that term was just an invention from the Enlightenment that has nothing to do with Israelite religion.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're viewing it as the existence of one God without other divine beings, then
then it's not there.
That's not biblical.
Yeah.
It wouldn't seem. So I almost find it helpful to use and I haven't coined this term, but I can't remember who did, but rhetorical monotheism. That you've got like God chanting down the other so-called divinities in Isaiah, saying they're nothing, but really he needs them to fight, because if you can't fight an enemy, you can't be triumphant. This is what John Levinson will say in his Creation and the Persistence of Evil. It says you really need all this chaos and other gods so that you can be a victor over somebody.
Okay.
And they kind of exist kind of for that foil. So, but I do think that some of the let's say the main line or the mainstream thought is that Yahweh kind of evolved as an idea.
Yeah, I know that's
which is really,
in terms of scholarship. Yeah, that's the
like
main
you've
one.
got like folks like Mark Smith, who's a wonderful scholar, but kind of this idea of Yahwehism evolving, kind of with the Babylonian and with all the rise of the empires, you need one empire, so you might as well have one God. That was a good idea the Babylonians and Syrians gave, and it's. But there's really not any evidence for.
Right.
I mean, all the onomastica. I'm sure I'm butchering that word, but there's very good evidence of different places in Israel always believing in one God, even though he's chanting down the other ones.
Right.
At the same time, and I think we kind of need that to have dominion in a way, kind of being able to articulate why Yahweh's better than the other ones that are competing.
There's a Leviathan to drag in.
Yeah.
He sort of destroys.
Yeah.
Likes to fiddle with it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Yanis.
Thank you for the Sabbath comments.
Yeah.
Okay, but I want to take it somewhere else. I would like your opinion about two issues here that they troubled me for years, and I need your opinions really. First is the plural, let us make man. Is this a plural of majesty? Is this anticipating the Trinity? Because we know that in the Israelite monotheists, you don't have the idea that we develop later in the New Testament. Number one is this. Number two is, he says, let us make man and woman according to our likeness.
Yeah, image and likeness.
What does this say about the human beings, men and women? And what does this say about the nature of God?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the first thing what I would say is that I think if you kind of read historically, you're going to start with kind of plural of majesty, but that doesn't mean that you can't retrospectively understand, Trinity there. Like, I wouldn't say that it's like, how can I put it? It's not required there, but it's compatible there, right? And once you know there's a Trinity, then of course,
We understand
yeah. And so, but Trinity is something that emerges. I mean, as an understanding. Obviously, it's not the first thing God reveals about God's self, and so. Then, so image and likeness. So there seems to be. So we're going to come to this next time. Next week, which is you get in both Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 this kind of, sexual dimorphism. There's like two, male, female, right? But the account that you get here in Genesis 1, I've been describing it as kind of the top-down, the cosmic view. And so it focuses us on dominion, and it kind of reminds us that this happens in beings that are embodied. And I think that's the primary point of male-female, is to say that this isn't some kind of essence that is completely, divorced from body, because this bimorphism, right, or dimorphism it's a feature of body, right? And so it's a way of indicating that even this one that we're talking about here, there's body, right? And so there's a long history of working with that in multiple ways. I think the baseline is just to say that both male and female are equally image of God, and that's important. That it's not you don't get an equivalent here or an analog to Aristotle, where humanity is by nature male, and then you have kind of failed males that become kind of female bodies, right? And so it's that there's this kind of God's desire for there to be particularity, in this case, sexual particularity, is there in the same kind of way that later we're going to find kind of the emergence of nations is something just that God desires, that there be different kind of ways of grouping, and so anyhow, I'm not sure if I'm getting it all to what you want to. Yeah.
Can I share something that
Sure.
I read and I found very interesting, and I found it in Erich Fromm,
Oh, from yeah.
To Have or To Be.
Yeah.
A very interesting thought about this verse. That's why I wanted your opinion. He said the male and the female is not only described in terms of external form, but also in a psychodynamic aspect. And of course, he says something that maybe some here will disagree, but they say usually men are related to their children in terms of law and obedience and justice. But females, they
terms of
relate to their
emotion.
children with mercy, love, and,
Yeah.
So somehow when it's like if God has he has all these elements together, combined, and he's just separating, psychodynamically, to each creature, So we don't have to do with external formation, the bodily form with the genitals or the, But when he tells them to unite and to make one flesh, he somehow is uniting together all these psychodynamics together, and through their union, they create
You have the
God
fruitfulness.
somehow. So I found it interesting, this approach. Of course, it's more on sociological and psychological, but you cannot separate these things from creation and creator, and all these things.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to contribute.
Yeah, there's actually an ancient. If you go back to Philo, he reads the male and the female is in this kind of way, where male is rationality and female is appetitive and so forth. So there's been a kind of a long history of trying to kind of type that way, with some basis, I would say, in the way in which this plays out in Genesis 2, right, in terms of different approaches. But yeah, so there are ancient versions of this. Yeah, yeah,
Anyway, he was a son of Rabbi
yeah,
Harry Fromm, so I thought that
Yeah.
he has it, a root
yeah,
back there.
yeah, yeah. 'Cause
But there is something more
uh-huh.
say universal. In physics, we have the principle of complementarity.
Yes.
That is, there is positive, but also negative. There is donor and acceptor, acid, base, etc. So probably male and female, I don't know, is an extension of that.
Okay.
Well, it is too much to say. That.
Interesting.
But you know, in the minute, the very minute, say, piece of the world, there is this complementarity principle.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's good. Thank you. Yeah. So, yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Hey, I'll say one thing while you're getting it. You know, it's interesting. I mean, if you just kind of think of like, there are different ways that creatures replicate, including like splitting and then two parts becoming and all of that. And so, one way, you know, one question to ask is, you know, what's the wisdom in choosing to have humans reproduce? And of course, it's not just humans; it's, you know, going way back, but you know, phylogenetically, but sexual union. There, yeah. What's in that? So, okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, and this whole thing, complementarity, makes me think about this question here. Perhaps humanity is not yet finished, incomplete. Rhetorical question, I suppose. There is an answer in Genesis and everywhere. And maybe it's kind of like the female and the male. It's also, I don't know if it's safe to say, a symbol of how we have to be complete with God, how He's different from us, and we have to become one with God. It reminds me of that.
Yeah. So I think of this agency or dominion as implying a kind of synergy, a co-working between God and humanity, and I think a lot of our own makeup is kind of understood better in that way. That, for instance, we have a will that, you know, makes a real difference in the world, but it's not capable of kind of it runs out of energy if it's working all on its own, right? It kind of needs to be together with something else, right? And so, yeah, there could be a sense in which this kind of interactive relation by which we exercise agency in the world that we're created for, that there's a kind of how you put this, a horizontal, a vertical, a horizontal as well as a vertical version of this, right? Then just as we're designed to kind of work together with God to do things, we're designed to work with each other and to complement each other for that. Yeah. So, yeah, that's a good thought. Yeah. So we'll get a little bit more into this next time with the just a preview. The way I read Genesis 2 is that you kind of get this dominion shone through the prism of life in the body, and there's three kind of primary forms that dominion takes. There's like three actions that are kind of primal for us, and so we'll look at that next time. And so, anyhow, yeah, Nikos.
So this problem of duality of the human nature, I would say. Of course, I'm using the word problem in the philosophical sense, not in the
question,
current sense. That is a problem that we are male and female. I don't consider that in this way a problem. Yeah, it's also.
It can be a good problem.
Yeah, or we are we are troubling for men. Men are troubling for women, and women are troubling for men. But apart from that, I think that in Christianity you can see like a continuum, a spectrum, or on two extremes. One is kind of a negation of sexuality. which can find in Augustine, in Roman Catholicism, and the asceticism, and Eastern Orthodoxy as well, of course. Which, like, theoretically, it's one could say that is like downgrading, like implicitly, the female aspect of human. Apart from Virgin Mary, which one could say, like, psychoanalytically, that is the only woman, because that fits the archetype of Holy Mother, and for boys, for Mediterranean boys, for example, Italian and Greeks. Woman is only their mother. The other women are just like, I mean, yeah. No, yeah, I'm speaking stereotypically, but these stereotypes have a very high degree of truth, unfortunately.
Okay.
Anyway, so
I can't address that part, but keep going.
Yeah, so in one sense, it's like many of the church fathers and ecclesiastical writers, it's like they find problematic. They are anxious about this duality, and they want, like, to supersede it, to overcome it, like either by meaning that men are like Aristotle, like men are like the complete humans, and women are like, because of the anatomy as well, are like half-formed things, like. And on the other end of the spectrum, maybe there is, if we put so much emphasis on this duality, maybe there is the danger of dualism, or of reading the creation of man as something that came out of, like, of two different of not just from one God, but from two different powers who are who complement each other. And this was, like, maybe Philo, the Alexandrian, and many of the allegorical like explanations. Maybe they fall into this, like, from ancient Gnostics to Kabbalah or to Mormons. So I don't know what is. It's like a pendulum. On one side, we tend to negate this duality, and we feel uncomfortable with that. And on the other side, there is the danger of falling into the dualist trap. Like, there is not just one God. There are many lower deities.
There's dyadic powers that are
in female and male form. So
Right.
I don't know if I made it too complicated, but
well, I'll say two things. First, I think that the deep problem that you see in Augustine and so forth, it goes back beyond that to this kind of decision to want to find a kind of a universal form of humanity. And so that's what, with Aristotle, that's the reason why he has to choose either male or female to have a form, and then one is going to be a defect of the other. And in his society, it seems obvious to him that it would be male, would be the perfection, right? That's a byproduct of having to have kind of a single universal form for humanity, in which that form is more real than the particularity of the people around. Okay? And part of what's going on here is that in this creation account, you get particular things. Like, even from the beginning, God makes, light, they're like whole objects. You don't have an account of atoms and and forces of yeah. Yeah, they're wholes in a sense, right? God makes wholes, whole entities, right, in this account. So there's this kind of particularity that's a feature of how Scripture presents things. That's I think it's philosophically significant, just as like an alternate route. It's a different way of approaching it, and so
It's the biblical Hebraic
yeah.
thought versus the Greek thought that wants to have like archetypes and forms.
Yeah, yeah, to a certain extent. Although it's not like there's no. Yeah. Anyhow, it's different. There's a difference there. Okay. Another thing is to point out that there's this kind of long history of how you make sense in kind of the Western tradition, at least, of this dimorphism, and usually there's these kind of metaphor complexes to talk about what it means to be male or female, right? And you get two primary ones that kind of compete with each other. One goes like this: male rationality, speech, and that's usually contrasted with woman body soil, right? And so you get that kind of dyad, and that very much kind of favors the male and denigrates the female usually. And there's all sorts of, there's a sexual ethic that comes out of that, of kind of plowing and things like this. But then also you get this kind of competing metaphor complex. And again, this, I can speak to the West. I don't, know everything that's happened on, further east. But you get this second set of like competing metaphor complexes to think about male, female, that goes something like this. Woman tongue culture, okay? Contrasted with male competitive activity war, right? And this, it notes that there's something a bit more important there. And it has positive and negative versions. You get kind of like the trivial version is kind of like, I assume everybody here has watched My Big Fat Greek Wedding? Okay. The woman, remember? It's like, so the daughter's wanting something from the dad and mom is telling her that she'll sort this out. And it's like, no, but the husband's the head of the house. And remember, mom says, but the mother is the neck, the wife is the neck, and she turns the head wherever she wants, right? And so there's this kind of sense of like, to be female is to have this capacity for communication that maybe is deeper than just rational, right? And that enables the competitive, a kind of reduction in what otherwise would just be ongoing competition in such a way that there can be a shared culture that emerges, right? So you get these two very different accounts. So this kind of dimorphism and what it means, it kind of runs deep through cultures. But I think what's significant is just that here they're kind of, in the first account, they're co-equal. Like they're co-equal and co-evil. They start at the same moment, right? And they both image God and all that. Now, in order to have any difference in the second one, there has to be a before and after, because that's how stories work, right? And so one comes before the other. But we'll work on that when we get there next go around. So, any other thoughts? Yeah. And then, what time is it? Yeah, we're going to have to wrap up soon.
Yeah. However, we have to think about this asceticism and hold this idea.
Mm-hmm.
I was studying church fathers,
Mm-hmm.
especially Gregory of Nyssa,
Mm-hmm.
that he described the androgynous of Plato.
Mm-hmm.
Just took the androgynous of Plato and he just depicted there the whole creation account, saying that there are two
Mm-hmm.
creations. In the first creation, God created a creature that it was like an androgynous, and then
Yeah.
he split the two. So you see all these things traced,
Yeah.
even to the church fathers, and a good father, which I like, Gregory of Nyssa.
Yeah.
But in this
Yeah.
aspect, we have to.
Yeah. That was the symposium.
So like Gregory of Nyssa, sorry to intervene.
No,
So
fine.
It's like Gregory of Nyssa actually uh, Platonizi.
He says that
Yeah.
very clearly. He
Yeah.
says that clearly in the Patrologia Greca, that you cannot explain the Bible without using the philosophy of Plato. Clearly 2 times.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I would say something that for us Greek Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox can be disappointing or dissatisfying. That there is a kind of there is some truth, maybe I don't know the degree, but on the accusation, so to say, so to speak, that many theologians put in for the on the Greek fathers and on the Orthodox Church as well. That it's heavily influenced by Plato, and maybe sometimes this distorts things. For example, this emphasis on asceticism is. Some say historically and philosophically and ideologically comes more from Plato than from the Bible. I don't know.
Well, there's a huge influence of Plato and Philo,
Yeah.
and but it's so complicated. These questions are so complicated because, like in the Greek canon of the Bible, for instance, there's works that are clearly influenced by Greek philosophy, like the Wisdom of Philosophy. The Wisdom
of Solomon. Yeah, obviously.
And so you already have this very early influence on works that are being read in the Jewish community.
Yeah.
Second Temple Jewish communities being profoundly Jewish, and they can't escape these categories that are already creeping in from Greek philosophy very early on. Yeah. But also, what's funny is the way that the church fathers themselves and a lot of Jews thought about this stuff too is that Plato was getting his best ideas from the Bible.
Yeah.
They literally thought that.
Yeah.
There might even be some truth to it. Who knows? I mean, most scholars wouldn't say that, but Plato traveled around. He enjoyed, the lore of the Egyptians, and he could have come across interesting, creation stories. I mean, he has there's some amazing lore in Plato. But yeah, as I guess one of the big questions I wanted to ask related to these quandaries is like, can you escape that though? When you're like, if you have a philosophical approach to scripture, these kinds of texts, can you escape Greek philosophy and Greek philosophical categories like philosophy itself? Is there any way to do it where it's not Greek actually? I even think of like modern schools of thought which are like phenomenology. I mean, it's a Greek word, phenomenon. It's trying to base things in our own experience and but is it possible to escape that at all? Can you have just like a sort of bare philosophy without a sort of reckoning with Plato or Aristotle and their legacies? When it comes to any question, whether it's a question of sexual differentiation or motion, so I guess that was the general question I had for you.
Yeah, no, I don't think that you can get away from it because it's part of, and I don't think it's helpful to. I think it is important to be able to bracket it and not mix them without in a kind of an unreflective way. I think it's important to be able to know when it's like, okay, so we're reflecting on this and it can say something different, and then we can kind of compare and contrast. But I think there's wisdom that comes out of that interaction. But I think there's more wisdom when there's clarity about the difference of the sources.
So it's still there, but it's in neutral.
Yeah, that's right. In neutral. I like this way of kind of suspension of things, and then you can bring them into conversation once you're clear on where they've come from.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I know that Basil the Great does that, for instance, or he tries to. I mean, I think there's a lot of categories that are sometimes inescapable for whenever we're bringing into the hermeneutic a lot of presuppositions.
However, Basil the Great, he made this great speech about the bee.
Yeah.
And the Greek literature. They said you should take it and use it, but like the bee, you should go to all the flowers and take the best pollen,
Right.
and then to spit the seeds, to spit out the seeds.
And he says that about studying.
So he was
pagan
very smart,
literature.
using that, but keeping the distinction between and having the discernment what to adapt and what not to adapt. So so you cannot avoid, but you can have the gift of discernment and to use philosophy to sharpen your brain, the muscles of your two hemispheres. That's good. But to mix it, without a critical thinking, that is a risk.
Right.
Somehow. But it's unavoidable.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. But and then we're gonna need to probably wrap up here.
Just to add one more thing on this problem of duality of sexual dimorphism. I think that we have to mention that for the Greek fathers, like you said about Gregory of Nyssa, if I understood well, and there is kind of widespread notion that for the Orthodox Church, maybe the Orthodox Church didn't have kind of encyclicals and all these things that the Catholic Church has. So Orthodox Church, you can never really actually know what actually believes. Sorry, sometimes. Sorry, that is on camera. Anyway, but but the widespread belief is that for the fathers actually were fathers, so they were men, and they were also celibate men, most of them. So the notion is that if the fall was not to happen, then God would have not created woman or man and woman. So there would no this kind of sexual union of marriage. So
I mean that's rooted.
Yeah,
that's rooted in a more basic idea that sexual reproduction is something that is inextricably tied to death, right? And so things that are eternal don't reproduce because they just last, but the closest you can get to lasting to eternity in a species that dies is reproduction. And so so there are speculations about that you do get in patristic thought, and so I find them very kind of extraneous to to what's going on in this passage, but and part of what I think I see here is there's more of just kind of the focus on there's a goodness in, at least a potential goodness in the interaction of the sexes that comes out here in Genesis 1, and you'll see it even more in Genesis 2.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned
that,
because for me personally, for example, as a theologian, as a Christian as well, it is kind of a problem that when Genesis, the Bible says that the world was made very good. So also human nature actually was created male and female before the fall. So how this can be what is the word for that?
Reconciled?
Reconciled with the notion that in the Orthodox Church, maybe because of the heavy influence of monasticism, that we learn that this was actually not the actual will of God, but it's like something inferior. Like God wanted for humans to be like angels and to not sexually reproduce themselves, but because God foreknew that man would fall, then that's why he created woman, or that's why he differentiated between man and woman.
Yeah, I can't speak to Orthodox dogmatics. It's it's beyond my pay grade. So, but those are questions that you can, and we'll come back around. I mean, we'll have an opportunity for that to be explored. But okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys engaging this well and with vigorous questions. And let me ask this question. Typically, I'd like to do these twice a month and do it something like, second and fourth or something like that, Tuesdays. This month, because we only have one more before we're closed, do you guys want to do one next week? Would you guys be available to do one more next Tuesday, and then we'll be closed for a few weeks?
That's the 23rd, right?
Yeah, the 23rd.
We're leaving the 24th.
We're leaving the 24th.
Yeah,
We're
for
leaving.
me it's not so easy, but
Okay.
There
Okay.
is a concert like in St. Demetrius.
On the 23rd, or
no,
22nd.
is that what?
Oh,
Let me
so
see what.
23rd might move.
Is that next Tuesday? The 23rd. The 23rd is Tuesday. So, but it's Tuesday is when it is? Or?
Yeah.
Tuesday, yeah. 23rd is Tuesday, and the concert
Oh,
is
yeah.
on Monday.
On Monday.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, so
Okay.
Monday.
So no conflict on that one. Okay. So let's plan on next Tuesday, if that works, and then it'll be like the 13th of January or something. It's going to be a while before, because we'll
Just
close.
another small announcement.